Inside of any church across Britain, there will be strange objects or curiosities which date back from a long time ago. Literally there is the tomb of a medieval knight. In fact, I was recently in a church that had copies of Harry Potter stacked up right next to a King James Bible, which was hundreds of years old. Anyway, many of these artefacts or items would have been used for worship in times long before. Some churches, like this one behind me in Friskenny in Lincolnshire, have medieval wall paintings on the side, and this is probably one of the greatest churches I've ever been in. This was the only way that people could understand religion, through paintings or images. Some people couldn't read or write during the medieval period, so they relied on scary images of hell to keep them in line. So people would walk into these buildings once a week, see something terrifying, be told terrifying things by a priest, and then fall into line and hand over money. Bit like modern systems of government, really. Anyway, I digress. But inside of this church, Friskenny Church, is a strange item, something of which it's believed that there's only 6 of them in existence in Britain today, and that, right behind me, is a hood. Now, a hood is a portable canopy and a structure that could be moved or placed in a churchyard, specifically for priests who would have been directing a funeral. It's basically a wooden box with a roof on top to shelter priests from the inclement weather and rain, somewhat of a very posh umbrella. So from these hoods, the priests would stand next to the grave, literally inside of them, during the committal service, and they would do what they needed to. The body would be lowered into the ground, and the priest, who, let's face it, was probably one of the most important people at the service, obviously behind the deceased, of course, who can have a funeral without the deceased, they would have been bone dry inside of a hood, whilst the family members get lashed by the great British weather. Probably when the clouds looked a bit dodgy and it looked as if the rain was on the horizon, the priest would have gone and got a few lads in the congregation. "Could you help me, lads, carry that heavy wooden box right next to the grave so I won't get wet?" Some hoods even had handles on the sides. Is this one? No, this one hasn't. It's basically so they could be lifted and placed in place easier next to a grave in a graveyard. They look almost like sentry boxes you'd expect to see outside of Buckingham Palace, or even in Berlin at Checkpoint Charlie, with guards stood inside of them. Pevsner, in his writings, described them as curious graveside shelters for the parson to keep dry during rainy burial services. They came around during the Georgian period, and a number of them do exist in Lincolnshire, and they do seem to be rather localised to this region. Some of the priests in this county may have been, let's face it, softer than others and less hardened to the great British weather. One in Pinchbeck, a short distance away from here, dates back to roughly 1725, and this one right behind me, it claims, is 18th century. But yeah, hoods, a strange and curious little shelter for priests to not get wet in during a funeral. Someone I know, actually a family member, once fell into an empty grave before the coffin was lowered in, broke their leg. Not a good morning, well, pardon the pun, morning, but yeah, a hood. That's probably something you've never known before, so yeah. Very, very cool.